Hello, and thanks for joining us. I'm Claire Farrell, and I'm joined today by James Dyke, Leon Simons, and Simon Michaux, and we are going to be talking about ecological systems, limits, breakdown, usual cheery kind of stuff that I talk about on a Saturday morning. So just to briefly let you know who the people are who are with us. James Dyke is a climate scientist and Associate Professor in Earth System Science from the University of Exeter. Simon is a geologist and a systems thinker, an expert on resource limits and post-growth transitions. And Leon Simons is a climate analyst and advocate for planetary boundaries and system-level interventions. And specifically, we've been in touch in the recent times around all this work with aerosol analysis with James Hansen. So all of them are experts in the most frightening information I think that you can task yourself with staring at on a daily basis. So thanks all of you for doing the work that you do. Sorry, Leon, I will pass back over to you and you can get started with your introduction.
Thank you. Yeah, hi. Yeah, I just wanted to bring you back to the past of the climate to. So wait, let me share it. Yeah. To see where we are today. So what this graph shows is the past 130,000 years on the bottom axis, and on the side axis you see the CO2 equivalents. And what you can see is that over about 130,000 years ago, CO2 was only a bit, or so the total greenhouse gas concentrations was a bit higher than today. And then the global sea levels were, then to 1750, and the global sea levels were about 5 to 10 meters higher than they are today. And then, of course, there was a decrease in the greenhouse gas concentrations. And then this was the last ice age when the global sea levels were about 130 meters lower than they are today. So there was a lot of ice stored on the ice sheets around the world. And now, of course, we are here because this shows the CO2, but also the other greenhouse gases converted to a CO2 equivalent. And then you can see that we have more than doubled already the CO2 concentration here in the atmosphere, which is an enormous increase. If we use a number for this, the forcing, which is called climate forcing, so how much heat is forced into the Earth system by these additional greenhouse gases. And if you convert that to Hiroshima bombs per year, that's 1 billion Hiroshima bombs per year, 4 watts per square meter. That's really like mind-boggling. It's I think not. We're not really able to comprehend these kind of enormous units of energy. Because of a watts per square meter, that's joule per second per square meter, doesn't sound like much, but if you convert it to like these Hiroshima bombs per year, then it might, maybe the scale might be more a bit comprehensible. So yeah, what that does impact the entire Earth's surface. And a bit of this is cooled and hidden by aerosols, but we are rapidly reducing air pollution, which is unmasking the real impact of these greenhouse gases. So yeah, I just want to give you a quick introduction on this, because this is really what, of course, these greenhouse gases are really what forces the climate to change. And what I think this really shows how much we have already impacted the global climate by adding all these greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leon. It is really difficult, I think, for us to get our heads around this kind of stuff. And even just numbers that, you know, I've been trying to explain to people what the figures that if you have 1 million seconds, it's a bit over 11 days, but if you have 1 billion seconds, it's almost 32 years. And even that difference is, we use those numbers all the time, talking about the economy, 1 million, 1 billion. We don't realize how different they are. So things like this are very difficult to understand, I think. Should we go over to James for an introduction?
Yeah, sure. So let me. Okay, so I'm maybe I'll just want to bracket some of what Leon just said. The penny dropped for me when it came for the climate and ecological crisis many years ago, actually, and that's when I first became aware of the research that said because of our increasing greenhouse gases, because we've seen that that spike, that dump of CO2 mainly into the atmosphere, we've delayed the next ice age, right? So for the last 2.6 million years or so, the Earth has been oscillating between glacial maximums, these tens of meters sea level rise and kilometer thick ice sheets, and then where we are in an interglacial, relatively, benign conditions of the Holocene. And all things being equal, we would expect the climate system to beginning to move into the next glacial maximum, right, over the next few thousand years or so. And that's a consequence of things like the Milankovitch cycles. It's just a natural variation in the climate system. And because we put so much carbon dioxide into the Earth's atmosphere, we've delayed the next ice age. And in fact, our driving of the climate system is now so strong that we're probably in the process of ejecting the climate system from that state it's been in for over 2.5 million years, right? And that for me was like bonkers. It's like we've managed to derail a climate dynamic which has been in progress for 2.6 million years or so, in the space of probably 100 years, because 100 years is where we put the vast majority of all that carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. In fact, we put over half of it in the atmosphere since the 1990s. So geologically, it's just like instant, and that's what we've managed to do. So then looking forwards to where is the world heading to as a consequence of what we've already done? And then that lets us think about, well, to what extent are we going to stabilize, right? 1.5 and the Paris Agreement, the 2015 Paris Agreement. And what I've more recently realized is that most people, most organizations, sometimes even most scientists, continue to live in this kind of this land on which what Leon showed hasn't happened, right? I'm not suggesting anybody's actually explicitly in denial, but I don't think really society, government, maybe even humanity has woken up to the brutal fact that we have fundamentally destabilized the climate system. So when they talk about our abilities to, stabilize warming at no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, I mean, they're just literally living in la la land, right? The only way that would ever have been possible is with a rapid reversal of that tremendous increase in emissions, which means probably, certainly now, and even back in 2015, a significant restructuring of industrialized societies, because fossil fuels produce 80% of all of humanity's energy requirements. So if you're going to remove 80% of energy, then you're going to have to do something really quite fundamental. This is not just increase the deployment of solar panels, as important as that is. So where we are right now is probably at the point of us beginning to acknowledge and realize what we've done, because climate impacts are going to start increasing and things are going to get worse. And then the decision that we've got as individuals, as collectives, as societies, is what do we do with this point? Do we carry on? Well, that will only work for so long, because eventually, the wheels of industrialized capitalism will fall off, because just as a consequence of first and second order climate impacts. Do we do what we should have done and rapidly decarbonize, and then think about how we can effectively and adequately and fairly share the resources that our economies produce in order to ensure that everybody has a good life? Or do we take another turn, a potentially much more frightening turn of isolationism, lifeboat ethics, increasing nationalism? And in some respects, we've been ducking those questions because we have been in a place of wanting things to go back, and they're not going to go back. we can only go forward, and what we have to do right now is think about the world that we want to progress towards. Thanks.
Thanks, James. I think it's really helpful for people to be brought into a constructive sort of forward-facing discourse, actually, because there's so much. I mean, I often say we've got far more information than we really need to know that we need to do some major changes, not necessarily the analysis part that needs our constant attention, as important as that is. But there's not nearly enough discussion about how to sort of see a way forwards rather than trying to sort of claw stuff back. So that's really helpful framing, and it takes us nicely to Simon and his work on transition work. We've never met before, Simon, but nice to meet you, and thanks for joining us. Would you like to make an intervention to get us going?
Hello, Claire. Nice to meet you. So when I come on these sort of panels, people, I often present information that's a little different to everyone else. It's coming from a completely different direction. I'm looking at the industrial flows. I'm tracking patterns in the data industry. I ask the basic question of, if we were to phase out fossil fuels, how would we do it? And our current plan going forward, well, the existing plan needs to go. We're in agreement there. The plan B, the green transition, as we think we're going to do it, hasn't been thought through in terms of how do we do it, logistics of doing so. There are aspects of the technology that we were planning to use that have not yet been fully understood, because they're all happening on a small scale, and none of them are happening on a large scale in a isolated, self-sufficient fashion. So, all right. What I essentially came to is the mining industry is going to struggle to supply the raw materials, and the manufacturing sector is going to struggle to manufacture the needed number of renewable technology units to put on the ground to do this. So then I actually went off and said, all right, well, if that won't work, what would work? Fossil fuels are going, that's not a question. And in fact, the plan I'm hearing from a lot of people around me at the moment, like I was presenting to some bankers in Westminster a couple of weeks ago, and oh yeah, we're just going to go back to gas. Yeah, oh man. Anyway, I'm now tracking China. What is the China footprint in the industrial system? And what has come to me very clear now is the business model behind our existing civilization is flawed. It's it's thermodynamically imbalanced. And that, like the old phrase, until we change the nature of money, we change nothing. Well, that's actually extended to all parts of our industrial business model. We also tend to think of things in terms of in isolation. Each entity I talk to, each business, each government, they look at their patch and no one else. And the problem with that, from an ecological point of view, the food chain is global, and it starts in the sea. And the sea is international waters, and it's considered not our problem. And the number of people I would come across and so, well, what about all the plastic pollution that is dumped in the sea, and all the nutrient overflow from industrial agriculture? Oh, that's not our problem. You can't prove that. We're not responsible for that. Right. And so, but then we see things like 7% of all plastic waste dumped in the ocean is coming out of one source, the Yangtze River in China. 7%, one place. And fundamental questions like, how much of this crap do we really need? Like the fundamental model behind neoclassical economics, I believe, will break down and be replaced with some sort of ecological or biophysical economics. And the existing infrastructure of industry will not go quietly, which is why they're having a wonderful game of musical chairs. And the rest of humanity is, well, what do we do with these guys? I can see things breaking, and as they break, a new system will impose itself. through necessity, not through design. And we're not going to do it willingly, because that's too hard. Our current system is very self-serving in terms of each of the actors. My primary concern going forward is the ecological species die-off that we're seeing, ocean acidification, land degradation, species die-off. That, to me, is where it's at. And, you know, that is actually, we could get in there and fix it. We could clean the plastics out of the sea if we chose. We could rehabilitate land that's been sterilised by industrial agriculture if we chose. We could establish natural biohabitats again if we chose, but we don't, and that's the problem. On that cheery note, over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Simon. Well, there's a lot there. I think there's a big agreement between a lot of us in the climate space that this sort of, you know, lack of overlap between people who are very siloed in like hyper specialisms is a huge problem. And that people need to very much more sort of cross over disciplines and into different fields to try and understand the sort of intersection of how, you know, my example that I always lean on is just how the economics work around climate was seemingly done without any contact with any real scientists. So very problematic, because they came out with completely sort of opposing concepts really about what was possible and what would be good for everybody and what we should do. Not that, you know, an economic plan would have been followed any differently, I don't think, necessarily because of the way big business works. But I wonder what your sort of position on things being thermodynamically imbalanced, and knowing that, for me anyway, the aerosols work that you did, Leon, with James Hansen, looking at Earth energy imbalance, feels to me like it's a real reframe of the problem away from just saying that the problem is the carbon, to really sort of saying that the problem is the energy and the destabilization that the amount of energy in the system is going to cause. Obviously, the carbon is causing that, but the immediate effect of the heat and the increased energy in the system. So if we have problems with physical limits in terms of energy and thermodynamic imbalance, but also in terms of like vast rate of species loss, could perhaps we could start with you, Simon, and then we'll go on to the other speakers in one at a time, to just ask what a realistic transition could look like, or what can we envision that actually would be a sort of feasible approach.
So what's interesting is I started out as we're in a lot of trouble. We've got no way through this. And I've now got to the point where I do see a vector through this. So first, several things have to happen simultaneously. First, we've got to create the technology that allows us to do this stuff. And energy is the primary resource, but it's not the only resource. Now, I'm looking at all energy systems, and there is now 4 or 5 of them that are useful, but ironically, 50, 60 years old. I've become very interested in thorium-fueled molten salt reactors. Now, that was written off as a thing that's, it's not possible, but the Chinese are now doing it. They've now got a commercial system actually up and running. And it turns out not most, but there are about 15 operators around the world, including the United States Department of Homeland Security, are getting this operational. I went down the rabbit hole. I found a whole lot of publications. I wrote a simulation for it, like if the state of Hawaii was to apply an 80% energy mix of thorium molten salt, what would that look like? And I looked at the footprint. Now, what this means is the energy return on energy invested ratio for thorium is very high, much higher than any other system I've looked at. It's small in footprint, it's small in resource requirements, and it is fundamentally different to any of the other nuclear systems that we've got operational at the moment. And all of that is public domain publications for those who choose to look. Now, let's say that works, because one of the arguments I often hear is, that's fake news. That's literally the argument that comes back at me. That's fake news. That's not real. But let's assume it is real. It is. If that works, we've got an energy system that we can now decentralize. We can have concentrated forms of energy that have no emissions at all. Once the device has been produced and the fuel has been loaded, there is no emissions footprint. It's small, it's relatively simple in complexity, and we now have an energy source. Second thing is, society will have to change how it does things. We have to get off this materialism kick. The vast majority of the stuff that we consume at the moment is material based on whim, not what we need, what we think we want. So what we want, what we need, and what we do have got to become the same thing. That's a massive social shift that it's kind of like asking a crack-addicted teenager to kick the habit before they're really ready to see that. That's kind of the proposition we're facing there. So we've got to change our priorities. Once we do that, we've got to reduce the complexity of what we do without necessarily losing capability. Now, the primary capability we've got to maintain as a society, I believe, is education. If you go back, say, 1,000 years, the majority of the people who lived, the moment they were born, is they were being carried around by their parents as they worked. And from the age of like 4 or 5 years old, they joined the workers in the fields. Right. Now what we do is our young go to school for 20 years before they join society as productive members. And that's produced the society we've got at the moment. We need to maintain that. That's the capability, that the target I'm looking at. Technology can move around, resource consumption can move around. The natural planet will adapt in a new biophysical bioshift planet-wide. It will do that, whether we like it or not. So we've got to simplify. We've got to become. We've got to change what we do and why. Then we've got to seriously look at sourcing. What at the moment we consume a lot of resources, natural resources from the environment, produce them into stuff in a fashion that is quite problematic in a systems context. It produces a lot of waste plume, and then we consume stuff and then we throw it away. It often winds up in landfill. It's not a hyperbole to say over the last 200 years we've terraformed the planet as a byproduct of industrialization. So we've got to rethink that from a very, very fundamental level. So we've got several major shifts all at the same time while maintaining a long-range target.
Cool,
yeah,
okay.
I could talk for hours, so I'll give the floor to someone else now.
Thanks, Simon. So maybe, James, if we come to you from that point, because of the mention of education, and obviously the education system you've just described has a lot of people who are perhaps still in some state of non-recognition, I don't know what the word is, of the reality of their situation. And even I was talking last night with some friends about it, and this, we may hit 1.9 degrees by the end of the decade. It's not, even for those of us who think about this on a daily basis and have done for years and years, it's actually quite hard to believe what's happening. But do you want to speak a little bit about the information sphere, education, and just getting people's heads around it in terms of being able to find a way forwards feels important, that people can situate themselves in the context that we really live in order to be able to think these things through?
Yeah, I mean, where do we start? In some respects, so I've been teaching undergraduates and postgraduates sustainability, like the climate ecological crisis for many, many years. And often one assessment is, critique an existing idea or propose a new idea. And often what comes up is this idea of education, because, as Simon is talking about, if you think about the climate and ecological crisis, one of stock and flow, we've got too much carbon stock and there's too much flow in, and it's going to take time to get the flow out. And it helps us understand that there are these big systems that we're trying to move or drive. You know, collectively, we've got to put our shoulder to some massive wheel and get it moving in the right direction, because at the moment it's just rolling down and like obliterating everything in its path. And education often comes up because when you think, well, what's driving those flows, what's driving those dynamics, often it's a kind of consumerism or hyper-consumerism, overconsumption. Just people are just taking too much. At the same time, of course, we've got at least 1 billion people on planet Earth who don't have enough. They don't consume enough energy or materials. And so really, you think about redistribution is probably at the key of any kind of credible response. And if we get into education, and then you could allow people to understand their relationships with Earth systems, their relationships with other people, the kind of the value systems that might be compatible with humanity having a long-term future, you know, it's great, right? Of course, the problem is that we probably don't have a generation for those young people to grow up to be into positions of power. You know, everything's got to happen like now. So we absolutely need ways of kind of socializing and communicating and popularizing the idea that there are other ways of living, there are other modes of living, there's other ways that we can derive value and purpose and meaning. It's not just about the size of your house or how much you spent on your car or abilities to just travel all over the world to get away from intensive mode of production and a capitalist society or something. All this needs to happen, and arguably it's always needed to happen, because many people in these industrialized capitalist societies are not even very happy. It's not even really working very well for most people. So those kind of value-driven things are really important. And then how do we connect with it? I think ultimately we've got to make stories which are more compelling than the current narrative, and certainly the narratives in which where we're going. I think in certainly the climate science community, we've been very good at laboring under this idea of an information deficit. What we need to do is just tell people where we're going and tell people what's happening and tell people what's driving it, and we just expect everybody to change, and they won't. We've got to come up with ways in which we contextualize that information, make it relevant to people, and underneath it, show them a kind of world in which they'd actually want to live in, not try to terrify them about the place that we might be heading towards. And that's not just about science. And in some respects, the last thing I'll say is one of the problems we've got with climate communications is that there's far too much of it is done by people like me, right? White Western men who might identify as natural or physical scientists, and we don't know anything about society or culture or communication and engagement and humanities and art, all the things that give people joy and vision. So there needs to be much less of me and more of other people who can weave the narratives and actually demonstrate that another world is not only possible, but it's actually extraordinarily beautiful and something that we'd all want.
Thanks, James. You're getting a bit of love in the chat that people don't want you to just fuck off. Leon, let's bring you in. I don't know if there's something you specifically want to follow up from that, but I mean, following my original sort of theme of kind of what is out of balance and what we could imagine is a realistic approach to tackling that. I mean, your specialism is the aerosol problem, which if we did do the changes, if we decided we wanted to change everything and we did decarbonize, we did clean things up very, very fast, we've got a very serious problem that most people can't, that most people don't know exists even, which is kind of one of your specialisms. So I don't know what you want to bring in to follow on from what's just been said.
Yeah, let me just, because you're asking about the aerosols, let me give you another graph. You can see it, I guess. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is really off the presses where I think next week or so, the IPCC, many of the IPCC authors will update their forcing graphs enforcing date. And this is, I showed you this line. These are the greenhouse gases combined, all these greenhouse gases combined to a CO2 equivalent. And I just want you, there's a lot going on here, but I just first want to show you this line, which is the same line as I showed you, but then in watts per square meters, which is so the forcing, which I translated to about 1 billion Hiroshima bombs a year worth of energy forced into the system by these greenhouse gases. So most know about greenhouse gas, and most have heard about, of course, CO2 and then methane, and so these are all these greenhouse gases added up to a single number. But what many are not aware of is the effect of aerosols, which are, if you want to understand climate change, if you build a climate model, you cannot exclude these aerosols, because these are these very small, tiny solid and liquid particles in the atmosphere that reflect sunlight and make clouds brighter, and which also reflect more sunlight, because that cools the planet, so hides part of the warming from these greenhouse gases. So if you don't include them in your models, like you misrepresent what's happening in the real world, right? So the model just doesn't reflect what's happening in the real world. So you have to include them, but there's a very big uncertainty there. So here I show the orange line here, or this line is the best estimate of the IPCC, and here the white line I included the estimate of James Hansen and our paper which we published together in 2023, which was called Global Warming in a Pipeline, where we show that the cooling effect of these aerosols, so how much warming this air pollution was hiding, was stronger than the best estimate by the IPCC. And much of that was also the effect of shipping emissions. And now we reduced the sulfur emissions from shipping, because main cooling aerosol is sulfur, sulfates. And then when you reduce this in 2020, you see the big spike up, and that translates also to a very big spike in this pink line of the net effect. And we see that also happening in the data. This is the yellow line is the observed absorbed solar radiation, and you see that really skyrocket upwards. So these NASA satellites see that there's a really big increase in how much sunlight the Earth absorbs, and there's also much more heat from being radiated back to space because the Earth warms, but that doesn't. Still, there's a big increase in how much heat accumulates as the energy imbalance James also mentioned, where there's more heat accumulating faster in the Earth system. And that, like most scientists who have looked at the data agree that the Earth's energy imbalance, so how fast the rate of heat accumulates in the system, has more than doubled in the past decades. And that's what causes, of course, the planet to warm. So we should also see the rate of global warming more than double in the next. Well, we're already starting to see that now, right? We already see that now. If you correct for all these variabilities of the sun, of the El Nino, of the volcanoes, then the rate of warming, the global warming, has already doubled from what it was between 1970 and 2010. And then, so what does that mean? What does that? I think what will happen now is that there will be much more extreme weather happening over and much more rapid sea level rise, more forest fires. So the land sinks of carbon are decreasing, and I think we're reaching a point at the moment already where all these climate protests cannot compete with what nature is doing. Right, these extreme impacts nature is having. Like you can try to block a street, but these extreme weather events, they will flood cities, they will burn cities to the ground. That's already what we're starting to see, and so soon people will start to really demand rapid action, and that will include clean energy sources, including, as Simon mentioned, nuclear power. E equals mc squared. That's just the potential of the basic physics of turning mass into energy is so enormous. So of course, why can't we use that in a safe and clean manner in the 21st century, right? We have to do that because we have to stop putting all these greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. Otherwise, we will completely wreck the entire Earth's habitable system. Right? And that's the truth. That's not some hyperbole. That's the truth. We are already committed to making many of the ecosystems go extinct. Right? The tropical coral reefs already at the present warming of about 1.5 are going extinct. I think that's in a way a silver lining that we did what we call this termination shock, this rapid reduction in air pollution, unmasking the warming effect of these greenhouse gases will make people see the real effect of the impact of climate change that was not visible because we were hiding it unintentionally with this air pollution. So I'm in a way that, of course, it's maybe not. It's not hopeful, but I think we can take some hope from that. That I think if people really start to see the real world impacts of what we've been doing to our planet, then I think there will be some really this change at the scale we need globally. Thanks.
Thanks, Leon. I mean, it sounds to me like the inability of us to be able to really sort of square up to this situation in a collective and kind of deeply honest way has been really problematic. And I know if people aren't aware, it's a really interesting story. Speaking of how, perhaps it's stories and understanding our context and understanding our politics and our humanities and the realities of our sort of social lives kind of potentially as or more important at this point than really getting our heads around the science. But I think it's a fascinating story that James Lovelock actually discovered the masking effect of aerosols a very, very long time ago, being funded by the fossil fuel industry to do this research. And the fossil fuel industry hid that, as well as the projected warming trajectories, which we know the stories very well about how they interfered with people's understanding of the facts. But
that was 50 years ago. And James Lovelock was told by Shell representatives to not discuss the cooling effect of this air pollution outside of Shell, indeed.
Yeah. So, which takes me to one of the questions in the chat, because we're running out of time a little bit. So I do want to open the Q&A section. I've got something here from Phil that says, related to the fossil fuel industry. After the floods in Spain, the Observer's global environment editor concluded we need to quickly kill the fossil fuel industry before it kills us. Isn't this among our top line tasks? So we rapidly scale down emissions, as well as moving to agroecological systems, freeing up land by moving to plant-based diets and mass rewilding. How we achieve this is another question, but that's why we're here. I suppose I can also see there's people from Fossil Free London who are here on the call, and lots of us have done lots of work to try and tackle the fossil fuel industry. But I suppose it feels at the moment like, being on the cusp of something which is, as you said, Simon, and not a voluntary sort of decision that we get to make about whether or not we have an energy transition, but that there is going to be one. It's just a question about how we interact with the circumstances and how we decide to collectively behave. It feels like all of this is related to our political reality, and obviously that's why people have come on this call to think about what we're doing and how we decide what we're all doing in these circumstances. Does anybody want to come in and just comment on this point about, you can have these calls in the media that say we've got to kill the fossil fuel industry, and yet there are more and more coal, gas, oil projects. People keep on perpetuating these industries. It seems like we're quite far away from being able to actually stop them. So I'm interested in sort of what's the what's the political dimension to this circumstance? I don't know if anybody wants to come in with a sort of with a line on that.
I could just very briefly say that one reason that we continue to see new oil and gas is because it continues to be very profitable. Just the expected rate of returns on these energy infrastructure projects are still returning very high rates of return for investors. So, for example, when you talk to people at certain banks like JP Morgan, who continues to be the world's largest financier of new oil and gas, the answer that you get back as to why do you keep doing this is essentially fiduciary responsibility, in that they have a legal responsibility to make as much money as they possibly can. These schemes are still very profitable, therefore they have a kind of responsibility or an obligation to continue to give money to oil and gas for the development of new oil and gas fields, right? So there is this, at some point, obviously the penny's going to drop, and probably that bubble will burst or collapse, or whatever metaphor you want. But it's very similar. It's got the similar vibe to the mentality and mindset going up to the 2008-9 financial crisis, where, again, bankers, financiers knew the system was completely unsustainable. They were pumping up a massive bubble, right? You were giving money for houses to people who could not possibly repay them, but it continued to be profitable. And the infamous quote was that we will continue to do that because whilst the music still plays, we dance. So even when you know it's a bubble, even when you know there's likely going to be a very brutal correction, you still do it because you've got the near-term incentive to maximize profits. So that's probably one of the biggest stumbling blocks that we've got, in my opinion.
And I've heard a recent sort of reframe from somebody that I think could be really valuable to people, which is, I think often there's this sort of the talk about the sort of watermelon climate movement. It's like red on the inside. Everyone wants to do all this communist redistribution politics, blah, blah, blah. Seems to me anyway, in Britain, it's a cultural kind of issue that there's been so much sort of polarization around ideas about economic redistribution in my lifetime anyway. But somebody recently saying to me, look, we've lived through like the most extreme form of redistribution that has ever happened in human society, which is how you end up with 1% of people in America apparently own almost 90% of the wealth. Or, the most richest man in the world, Elon Musk, having like the same amount of capital as the 52% or 60% or something of the American population. I mean, this is a really extreme thing that we've been living through in recent years, isn't it? That I think is not. It's often framed as like, how on earth would you do the redistribution, as if it's a thing that we need to do. That's not a thing we've been living through. Apologies if my internet connection seems weak. It looks like it's not very good at the moment. Can we bring you in, Simon, just to talk about this kind of problem of politics and economics with the fossil fuel industry? I mean, do you have a view beyond the resistance and the efforts that people are making about any way to hasten the shift in power from one form of energy production to another? Because I feel like sometimes people talk about this as if it's gonna happen no matter what, and systems change, but really having some sense of I don't know if control is the right word, but being able to influence it in some kind of positive way, so it doesn't just happen in a chaotic manner. Have you got views on sort of what would help?
So I was educated in the Australian mining industry, and I was working to support feasibility studies, and I was in regular contact with mining corporations through the first half of my career. In the second half of my career, I was in regular contact with government institutions like the European Commission, and I used to attend banking seminars, and you get a feel for what all this. And at one level, I see the world in layers, And there is the world that is presented to us in the media, and then it's what happens behind the curtain. And what's been presented to us in the media is everything's fine, that we're a law-abiding civilization, we believe in free markets, there's the law, we're all responsible, we're doing the best we can. Behind the curtain, it's money talks and bullshit walks. So 4 or 5 years ago, the mining industry had a very serious look at what do they do when they lose gas. A heavy industry is what do they actually do? Is it they just go out of business and they're done? And frankly, if that happened, the way our society is geared is we just go back to the Stone Age and eat each other. Because we have no plan B. We talk about stuff, but if certain things in the system go down, we have no replacement for them. Anyway, so how do you run a mine site that needs, say, 50 megawatts of installed electric power, which is, these things are quite a lot. And they looked at renewable tech, and they found that none of that was going to work. The only thing that came close was a deep geothermal hole, provided they were in a place that allowed that to happen. So to answer your questions, like what the hell do we do, is the nature of these large corporations is very self-serving. They don't necessarily care about what the voting public think. And their transnational footprint, where what they do is they hide behind tax havens, right? So what they do and how they pay tax and who they pay tax to is really, really hard to pin down, let alone enforce. Like in Australia, something like $400 million a year of tax is just simply not paid, just openly not paid. And the tax office at the time, they're too big, they've got too many lawyers, let's just leave that alone. This is the mentality you're dealing with. So to change this, if we could actually put a technology on the ground that would allow those mining industries and all other industries to function in a way where we can actually hit these targets. Like if we can offer a credible alternative, and so far we've not done that. Right. So if we can offer a credible alternative, then they might start listening to reason. So the problem is if we say, right, let's get the guillotines out and have a chat about who stays and who goes. The problem is we have no substitute system that would function right across the value chain. And so it's actually technology. What's interesting, though, is it's not a question of getting people together to have a talk about new ideas. We've already got the ideas. A lot of them have been ideologically rejected for one reason or another decades ago. But what is required is a fundamentally different paradigm behind everything, not just the business model, but how we do our technology, where we get our raw materials from, all of that. The nature of money is also about to change. And this is not something we should do. It's actually, when you look it out the window, that the European Union is seriously, well, they said they're going to do it, whether they do it or not, right? A European cryptocurrency replacement of the euros coming out in October, the CBDIC, or whatever they're going to call it. Whether they actually do that or not, or that's just a furphy to keep us occupied, remains to be seen. I'm highly cynical about these clowns. I call them the Muppets of Mordor. But what, if we were to take control of this, is to demonstrate something at a small scale where we, the people, can actually control it, because a lot of these industrial operations are so large, we're never going to finance that. At the moment, mining companies can't actually finance a mine because there's so much money. They put up about 30%, the companies themselves, and the rest comes from a hedge fund. So the banking industry controls all large industrial operations. And those banking institutions, they're not democratically accountable at all, let alone, we don't even know who they are. We've only got a vague idea of who they are in their structured form. So instead of trying to work with the existing system, please, sir, can I have some more? What I'm now advocating is we create a parallel system, demonstrate it works when their system doesn't work, and then they'll come to the party, and then they'll go, yeah, okay, perhaps we could work together then. They think they're going to take over. Maybe they will, but they'll take over with the new technology and the world changes. Something like that.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's where my work and a lot of people that I'm friends with from in the climate movement, that we've done all this work over the recent years to make it impossible to ignore, and people in resistance and people in prison and people, desperately trying to make sure that people understand how much danger we're all in and what the situation is. But really, it feels to me like we're at a time of, within the movement, transitioning into constructive work and trying to build different systems and different ways of organizing politics, thinking about different ways of organizing ourselves economically, people being, creative about new systems, whether that's food, transport, and understanding that we have to experiment with building all of this new stuff in a very agile way and a very collaborative way, in the understanding that we're sort of moving into times of breakdown and collapse, and the context is going to be really, really challenging. But a little like you said, Leon, the disruption that's coming thanks to our Mother Earth is going to be a lot more impactful than any body sitting in a road with their arm in a barrel or whatever. And so with it is definitely going to come these sort of realizations and opportunities, I think, for different ideas and different value systems to come through, for people to land new stories and new ways of looking at the problem, new ways of looking forward at the future and the things that we might want to enact together. So, things are already unfolding and there's not much we can do about some of that. We're definitely squarely in the changes that are happening. It's no longer a sort of, this is going to be very bad in the future conversation. But I hope that this conversation has helped us all to sort of situate ourselves with a bit of planetary kind of realism, as well as some kind of hopeful positivity, feeling about what actually is possible to change. Because I feel like I've been for a long time feeling that we're saying we have to change. People aren't ready for change, but I think they are increasingly ready to see things done differently. And the circumstances we're moving into are going to make that more possible, I think, not less. So I guess we'll have to close there. I think my timing on my schedule says that I have until 10:12, and I'm 1 minute late according to this. So that's quite good timekeeping, I hope. Thank you so much for joining me. You're all fantastic people. It's great privilege to be able to have a conversation with you this weekend, and thanks everyone in the chat. There's a lot of work to do, and I feel like we've increasingly got better ideas about where we should be pointing and how we should all be sort of facing in the same direction. So circumstances are frightening, but the situation in our movements, I think, is actually quite generative, quite positive, quite interesting. So thank you very much for joining us, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the day. If you're still with us, then I'll see you at about 3 o'clock UK time. I'll be talking with Peter Tatchell. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Claire. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks so much.